Thank you. Okay, great. I'll keep it here. Okay, so I'm very happy to be here. It's my first time in Korea, and I'm very happy to present UNVR. Many of you would probably be very surprised that the United Nations has a virtual reality lab. And not only that, a virtual reality app that you can download and that I would give you more information on. But before I start, the title of this is Representing the Pain of Others. So just a little bit of a story. I was able to be very fortunate to be one of the first people to really film in virtual reality. In December of 2014, I went into a refugee camp using this technology that I was hearing about, that I knew would transform our lives, and I wanted to make sure that we could use this technology to discuss, to get people involved with some of the most important topics of our time. When I wanted to do this, virtual reality was, as you probably know, is dominated by gaming and entertainment. And I really felt that this technology is so powerful that it can actually give you that feeling of being in the shoes of another. We had to try something new. We had to see if it could make a difference to get people to care more about issues that affect all of us. Issues like the Syrian refugee crisis, issues like the Ebola crisis that happened in West Africa, issues like in Gaza, issues like climate change. All of those things, I think this technology can really give you a really special glimpse into it. So this is usually a lecture in 3 parts, but we want to have some time for Q&A and for some moderation. So I want to just go into the first part here, which is the history of representing the pain of others. When I was given the camera, everyone told me, this is great if you can just show how horrible things are in a camp or how horrible things are for people, that it will change. That in some ways, it's just a matter of us being able to experience someone else's pain, that we will prevent that pain. Now, if I have a thesis, I have to say that's not enough. And that's why I'm going to try to show you what it is. It's counterintuitive that if you see someone suffering, that you want to help them. But I try to show you a little bit here that in each medium, when photography started, or painting started, or TV started, everybody went and did the same thing. They just tried to sensationalize and show difficult things. But there really is a different way of doing it that is more effective and raises more empathy. But just from the very beginning, when I started out with virtual reality, there is a lot of dystopian type of talk around virtual reality, that you are cut off from the real world. How can it make you more human? But even in cave times, these are cave paintings, we always looked inward. From the beginning of mankind, we've always found we've wanted to represent and try to get to the action and try to use abstract painting, abstract ways to get us to care and understand about the human condition. So I kind of think that the cave is the first virtual reality headset, It really is the first sort of moment where we look inwards to understand what's happening outside. And similarly, I think with virtual reality, there's this power it has that it ends up giving us deeper insight into each other. And I really do believe that, even though it looks really, quite silly sometimes doing it. So When I was looking at how we would do a virtual reality film on a social topic or on the Syrian refugee crisis, which was my first film with Clouds Over Sidra, I tried to study the history of visual media. And for me, this is in the early 1800s, it's the Napoleonic era, and this is the height of what they called war painting peak. This is right before photography kicks in, but really is trying to show in an enormous capacity to keep showing war. And war is represented in this way as something heroic, romantic, and in a lot of ways, this is really the moment right before you have photography. This is one of the earliest pictures from the American Civil War, so it's maybe in the mid to late 1800s. And this is one of the first pictures that actually is of a battlefield. So in the distance is a battlefield. Up on the hill are civilians who are trying to look and see what's happening in the battlefield. And here you have the photography, the camera, coming closer, trying to understand what the truth is. Now, many people can say that World War I was the first time you have photographs that dominated what was happening. Vietnam is considered where television tried to give us an insight into what's happening into the war. The Syrian refugee crisis, you could say, is the first YouTube war, because if you go on YouTube, you'll see different sort of ways. And now, what's happening is with Facebook Live, with the Black Lives Matter movement that's happening in the United States, you can watch somebody getting killed live. I mean, that's what happened with Facebook Live in some of those murders. So the whole sort of thesis is it enough just to show that, right? My thesis is no, right? Because if you go to World War I, this is a very famous book called War Against War. It basically took 40 of the worst images of World War I, right? Put them in a book and put them in print. By 1930 in Germany, it was in 10 editions in many different languages, but it did very little to stop World War II. It did very little to do other things that were happening. So in a lot of ways, okay, sorry, one second. In a lot of ways, that is the first sort of evidence that it's not something that is in of itself enough. You were able to show that, and that's what it was. Vietnam, the similar type of thing. TV was used as a way to kind of show extreme violence, a lot of what was happening, but it did very little to kind of, again, really change people's perspectives. Here's an example of footage from Syria, and we talk with a lot of Syrian activists, and again, they always say, if only people could see more of this footage, something will happen. But again, it's a mistake each time that we think this is enough. And why is that? Why is that? And this is from Facebook Live. The first reason is we grow numb. You can see all of these photos, you can see all of these images of suffering, but after a while, it doesn't seem to mean anything to you. So how many times, it might motivate you for the beginning, but now we're all used to seeing really horrible images, and we're not always motivated to do something about it, right? Because, you know, Susan Sontag, who wrote Regarding the Pain of Others, says it is passivity that dulls feeling. It's just, they wash over you, you're not really engaged with it, you don't really interact with it in that way. Now, this is a very famous picture of Aylan, the 3-year-old boy, that when it came, it really motivated people to do it. But again, how many of these pictures will you need when it just stops making a difference in that way? Now, to give you an example of how things were, these are some UNICEF pictures that were used. Again, we're using the same sort of shock and sensational way to show horrible things happening, right? And the thing that you have to contrast it with is what was once shown with UNICEF as being shock. If you go on the UNICEF page now, you're going to see a very different approach, where kids are smiling and they're happy, there's more storytelling, and it just shows you the reason that they shifted in that way is because that shock, those horrible pictures stopped working after a while. People stopped caring, they stopped donating, so much so that our approach now is the opposite extreme, which is, you know, there's help happening, there's people studying. But when I was trying, you know, we'll get to it, but when I was trying to do something in VR, I don't think it should be all bad, and I don't think it should be all good. I think VR is meant to capture something that's more ordinary, that is a kind of way in between to do it. So growing numb to these images, I think, is a very important sort of lesson. There's another shocker. We have a lustful relationship to violence. You might not like to admit that, because we all think we're good people, and I think we are, but I think there's something biologically in us with games, with violence, with TV. You know, there is something here. You know, if you look at Clockwork Orange, if you look at, you know, a lot of ways that violence is depicted, there is something in there that just showing horrible things is not necessarily enough, because there's something in us that is attracted to it, which doesn't necessarily make us act on it. Same way when you're on a highway and there is an accident, everybody slows down and stops to look, but not necessarily to help, right? So that's another reason just showing horrible things is not enough. The third reason is it can be exploited by the enemy. What do I mean by that? If I show someone suffering, let's just say I show, you know, X person suffering, that doesn't necessarily mean that everybody thinks that suffering is bad. Because for some people, if you show, for instance, in the Black Lives Matter, if you show a black person being killed, a racist is going to be very happy, right? Similarly, in Gaza, when you have, you know, an offensive, there are people who go on top and they'll watch something for very different reasons than Palestinians would watch it. So again, if you're showing something horrible, it's, again, not enough, because the other side can get very excited by that other thing. So the same picture that you saw before of Aylan that used to motivate Europe to try to bring in more refugees was used by ISIS itself as a warning to say, you know, this is what would happen to you if you leave. So I think the point is, when you make things in VR, when I had to do it, it's counterintuitive just to show people suffering. You really need to think about it in a deeper way. Why? Because sensational, shocking pictures, they kill storytelling. It really is storytelling that's going to do it. Now, you can either see someone getting killed, or I can show you the morning before they're killed, playing for the last time with their little daughter. And you're able to see it knowing that they're going to die in 2 hours, but you will realize you will have a feeling, you will have storytelling of an understanding that it's more powerful than showing them just dying. Show a documentary which I really recommend everyone to really watch. It's the gold standard of documentary. It's on the Holocaust by Claude Lanzmann. It's fascinating because it's considered the most empathetic, the most powerful documentary, yet it uses no archival footage from the Holocaust. It's purely interview storytelling. He goes back, yet it's still because your imagination has to work, right? Because it really is, when you do something that's shocking or sensational, it paralyzes the imagination. And without imagination, there's no empathy. So you might be wondering, what are some good examples besides Shoah, right? Silvered Water uses YouTube footage and was at Cannes and really builds a story around a lot of this footage in a very interesting way that I think is great. During the Depression, of course, this picture was more iconic and much more mobilizing than what you saw in War Against War with all those horrible pictures, because you have to use your imagination. What is she thinking about? What is the worry? Look at those kids. You have to go a little bit deeper. And it's the same thing with virtual reality. It's very easy to shock people, but in a lot of ways, you have to just bring them an ordinary experience. These are pictures from Auschwitz. In of itself, you look at it, you think, okay, kids there. But the real caption, when you look at this in the Holocaust Museum, is that this is the moment before people are about to go into a gas chamber and die, okay? Now you look at this picture in a very different way, with those little boys holding hands, and the older one maybe knowing what's going to happen. And you feel different, right? And this is another picture of the kids in a different way and the mother with her pursed lip in that way. So I think those are some of the broader sort of ideas that I think are very important. Now, that was philosophical. We had to do it because in virtual reality, because it's a new medium, and the work in the films that we do, it gives you a good sense of where we are. But I want to very quickly also tell you how we usually used to do things at the UN, we still do it, and how our VR project is a bit different. Usually, when we want to get the word out, we usually call celebrities, right? Angelina Jolie, George Clooney, and everything of what we're doing. But I've noticed that with time, that's become less and less effective. It's still important, but in a lot of ways, we need to use new technologies. We have to work with internet influencers because some of our traditional ways of doing things don't necessarily connect with people. Now, I think it's important to be self-critical, because that's the only way you can get better. But, our traditional ways, we have not as many hits as we would like to have, right? Now, why is that? Because a lot of our work is still based on the belief that if we tell you what's happening, that you will get involved and you'll talk about us, and maybe you'll have 5,000 views if you do something like that. Now, if you get Angelina Jolie in conversation, we're about 90,000 views. That's a little bit better. But what are we really up against? This is what we're up against, right? Burgers and Cats, which have like millions of views that we do it. So in a lot of ways, for me, when I was up against these sort of ideas, people said to me, people don't care about these issues in the same way. And I don't believe that. I really believe that if things are told in the right way, if they're done in a way that's more with storytelling, more artistic, that people will react to it. So before I did VR, we did something called Keep the Oil in the Ground, which is where we tried to tell first-person stories. And so this was one of my first attempts at storytelling that, has almost 2 million views on YouTube and was able to get the Ecuadorian government to apologize to this indigenous community. And if you watch it, it's not about the UN, it's not about our programs, it's about the people. Because really, it's people's stories and their heroism that's incredible. All of our VR films that you will be able to download and be able to watch on a cardboard or in your headset are always centered on people. It's not about the programs. So that's what we continue to do. A lot of our sort of ways of thinking is my work with Humans of New York, which we did a UN tour, which is a very similar way where it's just a photo, but it's storytelling. It's the idiosyncrasies of people's lives. So again, that lays the groundwork for what we're doing. Now, fast forward to our first film, Clouds Over Sidra, The Empathy Machine. Why VR? We believe that there's something incredibly immersive and powerful that leads to a greater empathic response in virtual reality when done with the sort of storytelling that I'm highlighting, with the sort of philosophy that I'm highlighting. Why am I hearkening the point so much? It's because VR is new, and when I give someone that experience, they actually think it's the technology that's leading to the empathy and not the storytelling. It's both, but I want to argue that it's a particular type of storytelling with the technology that is more effective. Because otherwise, you just think it's the technology. And it just doesn't work that way. Because if you don't do it in the right way, and you don't make the stories the way that are impactful, it won't have the same empathetic response. Also, I think it's important to think about what empathy means. What is our definition of empathy? And I think everyone should have their own sort of ways of thinking about it before you go into it. But for us, it really is this sort of encounter and breaking a hierarchy and being able to react and do that with somebody. So we've been experimenting with VR, and I have to justify whenever we do something in VR, there's two things we really need to do. We need to be able to take it to scale and show some impact. So, immediately, when we put out our films, we're able to get very good responses from a lot of people. and our films have been at Sundance, at Tribeca Film Festival, have been nominated for an Emmy, and really are pushing forward the boundaries of storytelling. So we've been able to not only get press, but that means our issues get press, in the sense that more people are more aware of some of the topics we're dealing with, and that's been, really, really important. We have a mission, and our mission is about action, and one of the more amazing things that we do is one of the biggest ways we raise money around the world, especially with UNICEF, is the face-to-face fundraisers. And we have this in Korea as well. And what this does is, usually people stop you on the street and ask you for money, and they don't have virtual reality. And if that's the case, 1 in 12 people will give, right? But if you give them a virtual reality experience, which is this one, it's a 4-minute experience of Clouds over Sidra, 1 in 6 people give. It doubles the rate of donations. So that is really, really important for us, that we're able to have this now in 40 different countries, in 15 different languages, in similar type of setups like this. So, that is something that I think we're going to continue to do, and is very important, because of course a lot of these problems do require a financial sort of thing. But what we also have is one of our latest films, which is My Mother's Wing on Gaza. It wasn't just about raising money. We wanted to bring it's a story about a mother who lost her children in Gaza, in Palestine, which is a closed-off place, okay? And most people in Israel haven't even been there or understand it or don't get images from it, don't connect with people. So we have taken this film, and rather than ask people for money, we showed it in the streets of Tel Aviv, in the streets of Israel, to give people a sense of whether they now have a better understanding of Palestinian people. And so we're building a little documentary on that and a questionnaire to get people in a sense that, to change hearts and minds and to get people to do it. So those are just some of our examples, and we'll be doing more. And I'd like to now just bring up James for a little bit of a discussion if you have more questions. Thank you.
Okay, Gabo, thank you for your talk.
Thank you.
And as you have a very a short minute, I'm going to ask you questions. So what's values in collaborating with the United Nations, and whom do you want to influence, and what's the background?
When we started this, we wanted to influence decision makers. I went on a trip with a prime minister of a country I'm not going to say who, where we went on a trip to Africa because they wanted to know more. And when I went on this trip with this prime minister, I realized that even by going there, it was a very artificial experience because people are not natural. She didn't totally understand what was happening with people. So we wanted to develop something that would give people a real experience of what people were going through. And that was the first step. But now with our app, we're trying to affect the world. I mean, now everyone all over the world who has a smartphone, whether it's on iOS or Android, can download it, get a cardboard device, get a Samsung Gear device, get an Oculus device, and watch these stories. And then, more interestingly, in the app, we have an action button where you can then, after you watch it, you can take action and get involved to do something about these issues.
You mean action means donations, or?
So we have something where we right now have it on donations, but we're going to have it where we're going to have other ways that you can get involved.
Great. And how many people have seen your films so far, and the reaction to VR, like your films in particular, is different from country to country or city or city?
Yeah, so I mean, VR is only now starting to go mainstream, and our purpose in having the films at a very early stage means that when all of you now get your VR headset, our content will be waiting for you. And I think this is incredibly important for 15, 18-year-olds, young people who will not only have games, there's not that much content, right? So if one of them is some UN content, I think that's going to brand young people to really get involved with it. I think overwhelmingly across the board, people feel very similarly about the content. I don't think there's necessarily a difference. It actually is a little bit more intense in Middle Eastern countries where some of these issues are. So clouds over Sidra is on the Syrian refugee crisis. Gaza, of course, is also a Middle East topic. So in those areas, I think it affects people a little bit deeper because they're living through this or someone in their family has gone through it. But in general, it's been a pretty uniformly good response.
Cool. And what's the most touching moment that you see and find from viewers action changed?
Yeah, I think for me, we've had a lot of very high level heads of state and people at the UN, and you were there at the UN when we showed it at the General Assembly. We were able to really, change people. One of them was Ambassador Samantha Power, who actually was recently here in Korea. And she was able to, she was really, as a big proponent of a lot of work on resettlement and the refugee crisis. And her watching that film and then going into a refugee summit and working on it is something that I think was deeply moving for her. And that was really our purpose because, I've always from the very beginning said we need to rethink our resettlement policies, we need to take in more refugees, we need to be more humane. And I think that's something that I've seen her thinking change on. And I'm sure it's not just the film, but I know the film was at least a catalyst, and that's very touching for me.
Great. And it's an important question is that for the sustainable growth of each countries and solving the pain of the humanity in Asia, maybe same in the Syria, what would be the main role for government for this? And then furthermore, how the partnership between the public and private sector should be made to achieve this goal?
Yeah, and you mean in particular for the Syrian refugee crisis?
No, about the Asia, in North Korea or South Asia.
Yeah.
Same as refugee ones in Syria. So.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I'm not here to necessarily prescribe some of those things because I think it's a very, I know, my first time in Korea, and of course I know it's a very delicate situation. So I think, stories like this, hopefully, can make us understand each other better. And I definitely think if there was a use of this technology with some filmmakers here that can get us to understand all the different issues that are happening here. I was talking to a young artist before we were mentoring who mentioned a shipping area where millions of jobs were lost or there's something going on. I think when you read about it in the newspaper or you see it in the news, it's just statistics. But if you're actually able to understand what someone is going through, I think it then mobilizes different policy. I think public-private partnerships are key. All of the work, I mean, how does a bureaucratic, resource-strapped organization like the UN become a pioneer in VR? It's partnerships.
Between the public and private.
Yeah, and we've had a lot of support from Samsung. We initially supported our launch at Davos with the Secretary General, with Ban Ki-moon. And I think that's incredibly important that private sector works with public institutions to try to bring its innovation. The private sector is incredible at innovation, efficiency, technology, but the public sector, like the UN or a government, is when they adopt something, they can bring it to scale. They can make more impact. So you need to really work together to do that because we have 150 country offices we work in, right? So that means that we have a direct line into emerging markets, a direct line into people on the ground and understanding what's happening that most private companies won't understand. So I think working together, the UNVR initiative is really something that brings two of that together in a very interesting way and is creating more impact as a result. We have people in 40 different countries, fundraising already, so when we included the private sector thing, we're able to make more impact. Otherwise, you have to start from scratch. So we have certain infrastructure that if we work with the private sector, makes for a better outcome.
Very interesting point, and that means that cross-border, like a public-private sector partnership would be really important, right? So in that sense, in Korea, there are VR and AR related entrepreneurs and startups based on strong technology. So for them, what would be the ways for them to work with United Nations and how this can be made at the initial point to achieve the same vision, to
Yeah.
solve the pain of the humanity. So.
Yeah. Well, we've launched the app and we're looking for third-party content.
Good.
So we are opening ourselves up to other filmmakers, artists, people working in virtual reality who have good ideas that we want to know about. So, and I've already talked to, being here and having the lunch and everything, there's an incredible amount of talent here.
Yeah, right.
There's an incredible amount of enthusiasm and intelligence. I'm really blown away by being here, and I've always heard that about Korea. So we are looking to put those stories on our app and to feature certain things. We also have a partnership with Oculus. It's a VR for Good partnership where we sponsor 10 filmmakers every year, and we fund their films, and we give them cameras, and we mentor them. And
Great.
our first sort of batch is going to show their films at Sundance in January, and I've been a part of that. And some of those films will be on the UNVR sort of thing. So there's many ways. Now, if people are more amateurs or they're students, we also have the Samsung Gear, the smaller cameras that we're going to get from Samsung to develop storytelling kits to get it to other people. And so there's many ways we can do it. And so if people go to our Facebook page and like us, they'll find out more information, and you'll be able to find out more on the website and join our mailing list, and we hope to get more of the stories here told.
Great. It's great. And what's next?
So a lot of our films right now are in 360, which means that you can't walk around. You can just basically, you can't walk around, but you can look around. So my next big project is a walk around. The next big project is a walk around project.
여기 마이크, 네, 가보 마이크. The last one. Yeah. Okay. Yes.
Sorry about that. They're cutting us off, because we're speaking too long. The next project is a walk-around project using the HTC Vive, which is where you can go around you can walk around a certain area and discover it, and it's a whole new type of storytelling.
Very good.
360 is just the beginning. It's really going to be room scale and walk around that's going to take us even further into a virtual world where we can walk around and explore. I met some interesting companies here with haptics. I think, if you wear certain sort of things, you can do that, where you engage all of your senses. So it's an incredibly exciting time to be involved with virtual reality.
Yeah.
And I want everybody to know it's not just gaming and entertainment. You can do something on
Very good
social
point.
good.
Yeah.
We're here to support you. We're here to work with you. It's lonely, it's difficult, because so much of the funding is for,
Yeah, right.
but, the first-person shooter games.
Rocket science.
But we're going to try to, we're here to keep fundraising, to work with you, to keep telling these important stories, because this medium is too important to be hijacked by everything else. It needs to be taken differently because our world is totally different now, where we need to use technology for social good, for human good, to solve our problems.
And in that sense, the social investment should be increased too, right?
Yeah, we need to come up with a social enterprise model, and I think everybody is looking at that in a very serious way. With a regular non-profit model of just charity and a foundation, I don't think it's enough. And using government tax money is obviously not enough, because we have crisis and we have less tax revenue and we have more problems with that. So I think we really need people to understand that a lot of this adds value to society, and so we need to find creative ways to fund it. I've found creative ways to fund this stuff with partnerships and other ways, but we need to make a more sustainable way that this is going to work. And we've done that in the past with public broadcasting, right? Where we think there should be something in the airways, where there should be social sort of, social sort of channels that give you that. So I think with VR, from the very beginning, we need to consistently think about a better funding model and to really get people excited about it. Now, what's important is that this content doesn't feel like you're eating your vegetables, that it's artistic, that it's cutting edge, that it's in film festivals, that it's award winning, because that's very, very important, because especially more important with these topics that they're engaging. And that's why I spent so much time on the storytelling part, because I think that's what's going to make the difference.
Okay, thank you, Gabo, for your sharing insight. And give a big hands to Gabo. Great, man. Yeah, thanks.